Thank you, colleagues. Thank you. Parliament resumes, and now I can confirm that no amendments have been lodged at stage 3, so we will shortly move to the stage 3 debate. Point of order, Sir. Minister Kevin Stewart.
Sir, during today's debate, I got some legislation mixed up in terms of illegal evictions, mixing up the fines with the landlord registration and letting agent legislation. And I'd like to correct the official report, please. The summary conviction and maximum fine for an illegal eviction is £10,000. So I want to set the record straight on that front, and I apologise to Parliament. It's been a day where things have happened very, very quickly, and I'm mixing up legislation, and I do apologise for that mistake, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much, Mr Stewart. I'm sure members are very grateful for that very quick and speedy clarification. Now, before we move to the stage 3 proceedings, I have a determination to make, which is, as members will be aware, I am required under standing orders to decide whether or not, in my view, any provision of the Coronavirus Bill relates to a protected subject matter. That is, whether it modifies the electoral system or the franchise for Scottish parliamentary elections. In the case of this bill, my view is that no provision of the Coronavirus Scotland Bill relates to a protected subject matter. Therefore, it does not require a supermajority to be passed at stage 3. So we turn now to stage 3, and this is a debate on motion 21371 in the name of Michael Russell, the Cabinet Secretary, on the Coronavirus Scotland Bill. And before I invite Michael Russell to open the debate, could I call on him to signify Crown consent to this bill?
Crown consent has been received.
Thank you very much. I can also suggest to members that decision time will be either at 10 to or 5 to 8. Around 10 to or 5 to 8, we will ring the division bell 10 minutes before and then again 5 minutes before to give members an indication of when the vote will be. I can now call on Michael Russell to speak to and move the motion in his name.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I will be very brief indeed. This has been a long day. I don't express any pleasure at having spent this day passing this bill. It would be far better if none of us had been called to do so, but we have been, and we've had to face up to our responsibilities. I was a member of the first parliamentary bureau in this chamber. I think the last founding member of the bureau who is still a member of this parliament. It was a great privilege to move some of the early points of order, to be involved in the setting up of the structures, and to be a first in lots of different ways. But I didn't ever think that I would be the first to bring forward this type of emergency bill in this way and in these circumstances. And it is not something I would have anticipated or wished for. Nor, I have to say, would I have anticipated or wished for some of the outcomes that we've had today. There's no great pleasure in winning debates and votes in this particular piece of legislation. We operate according to what we believe to be true. We operate according, as the First Minister has constantly said in this matter, according to the best advice that we have. We try to be honest about that advice, and we also try to be transparent about that advice. Of course.
Daniel Johnson.
I thank Mike Russell's reflective tone, because this is a serious moment in time for the Parliament. I wonder if he'd also reflect on the fact that the government won a number of votes, especially on the amendments dealing with FOIs, on the basis of a misunderstanding, as I understand it, or certainly an alteration in the provisions that have been made in this chamber under the circumstances we find ourselves. And I would just wonder if the government would reflect on the fact that some of the things which are in this bill are there because of those circumstances, and whether it will proceed with that in due consideration.
Michael Russell.
I don't want to enter into any type of dispute about this. I've spoken to our business manager, and I do know that payers have been honoured. But that's not really the issue. The issue really is we have a bill. We're going to operate that bill. I can give a commitment to Mr Johnson, to the rest of the chamber. We will operate it with great sensitivity. And we will always be mindful of the fact that there are elements in this bill that were not unanimously agreed. And therefore, we will operate in that way. But I don't think it would help any of the people of Scotland if we were to start to go back and to say, well, that bit wasn't really approved by such and such, or that wasn't approved by such and such. You know, I made a commitment that I wouldn't bring things back at stage 3. But I also decided mid-afternoon that if, mid-evening, essentially where we are now, that if we had lost items, I would not have brought those back to change at stage 3, because I did believe that if it was the will of the Chamber, it was the will of the Chamber. We have a decision made on a whole range of issues, and now we will press forward and implement them. But we will do so with great sensitivity. And I say here to Neil Findlay, I think the point he's making, the point he made and Adam Tompkins made, and I've often fallen out with both of them, sometimes at the same time, but I have to say that I do believe that the point they've made about action short of legislation is worth considering. And I hope all of the things we do, we will try and make sure we operate in a way that does not require the legislative sledgehammer if we can do so. And I would make that commitment, and I'm happy to have that discussion. In addition, I've made the point about Anna Sarwar's proposal. We will work very closely with that, and that in itself may help the flow of information and make sure that people get what they want. I repeat the point I made on that. I think there are many ways in which information can come out, and I want to see all of them used. Presiding Officer, at the start of this debate, my colleague Jenny Gilruth, and I want to reflect that this is the first bill that Jenny Gilruth has been involved in this chamber. There can be nobody, I suspect, who will ever have quite that experience again. I'm grateful for the work that she's done. She will do a great deal more work on this whole issue as we move forward. But she said in her opening remarks that these are dramatic and unprecedented measures for dramatic and unprecedented times. Of course, these times are not totally unprecedented. Many generations have lived through this challenge and have survived this challenge, the challenge of a global pandemic, the challenge where people are nervous about their future and their lives, people are frightened, people are concerned. But we have a job as leaders, political leaders, leaders in our community, to encourage, to support, to guide, to legislate, yes, where we have to, though that is not the first resort that we have, and in the end of the way today to work alongside our fellow citizens so that we can come through this challenge together. So we will do so. There is no aspect of our lives that will be left untouched, and we will take all the measures necessary to control and limit the transmission of the viruses. But in the end, it will be collective action that makes the difference. And we have added to that collective action today. It has not been easy. We've had differences of opinion, but we have in the end done it together. And I hope when this bill comes to vote in a few moments' time, we will do it unanimously together and indicate to the people of Scotland that we are leading. Their Parliament is leading, and their Parliament intends to lead and to deliver for them, no matter the difficulties. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Paul Murdo-Fraser.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I'm just going to make a few brief comments around the bill, about the process and about some of the aspects of it. First of all, in relation to the process, and this point was made by colleagues during the Stage 2 debate. I think we're dealing with Stage 2 of emergency legislation. It's very important that we bring forward amendments which are not pursuing a particular political or policy agenda, where there's not been proper opportunity for scrutiny, for consultation, for engagement with stakeholders. And I think we need to reflect on that. It's important in any bill, but particularly important in emergency legislation, where literally we are dealing with amendments in a matter of minutes and trying to understand what their legal import is. And I think we need to reflect on that for the future. There were some quite significant policy issues we looked at in the course of the day. In the morning, which feels like a long, long time ago now, we were facing this whole issue of the removal of trial by jury, which was an issue that caused a great deal of concern, not just in this chamber, but across a wider Scottish society. And I'm pleased that the approach the government took, that was to take this away and say they will look at it again, and they have promised to bring it back in a new bill. And I hope the government does some serious work around this. And we don't find ourselves back here in 3 weeks facing just the same proposal where the government says we've looked at the alternatives and we don't think they work, because I think it's clear that across the chamber there's a great deal of disquiet with the removal of jury trials, notwithstanding what the Lord President has said. I think what we want to see is the government doing some serious work, looking at the alternatives, use of alternative premises where spacing might be permitted, use of video links, perhaps testing of jurors before they assemble. And I think that's the... Yes, of course I can wait. Yeah.
Hamza Yousaf.
Can I thank Murdo-Fraser for his comments? Murdo-Fraser will accept that there has been some serious work, of course, done in relation to alternatives. This was not a decision taken lightly. But nonetheless, we will work constructively, but we may get to a position where if absolutely fundamentally we may have to make a choice between either going down the route that was suggested today, and if not, we may have to go down the route of halting solemn proceedings altogether until public health guidelines allow jury trials to take place. And in that case, we'll all have to go in eyes wide open about the implications and effects of a potential backlog.
Murdo Fraser.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that intervention, which was very helpful. But I think it's clear where many of us in Parliament are about ending jury trials. So we will continue that debate in a few weeks. We've talked about during this legislation about how there will be points we will have missed, and there's talk about another bill. We've put forward some ideas already that might go into a subsequent bill. My colleague Graham Simpson has suggested things around property rentals, whereby we recognise that there are properties currently which are designated for self-catering lets, which will not be taken up as self-catering lets at any point in the near future, and therefore might be available to go into the private residential rental sector, and that would require some changes around legislation to allow that to happen, and that's something I would encourage the government to look at. One other very minor point that's been raised with me, which I think is important, is that current licensing laws prohibit the purchase of alcohol in supermarkets before 10 a.m. And that means for people who are in vulnerable groups or NHS workers who have given allocated time to do their shopping before 9 in the morning can't then purchase alcohol. Now, that might seem not an important point to many people, but actually for those individuals it is an unreasonable restriction. So I would encourage the government to look at that as well. We are granting new powers to ministers. We are seeing more powers granted to the police. I think it's very important that these powers are exercised in a proportionate manner. I think there has been concern about some actions taken by police forces down south which have been disproportionate. We believe in policing by consent, and that means the police acting in an appropriate and proportionate manner. And so far, we have not seen any concerns about this from Police Scotland, but we did keep an eye on that. And finally, Presiding Officer, we look forward to engaging with the other parties around how we properly scrutinise the government. Can I just close by thanking again the Bill team for all the work they've done, thanking the Cabinet Secretary for his engagement and the open way he has approached this. We are in exceptional times. I never want to see again a situation where we are having to deal with legislation like this, responding to a crisis of this nature. There's a huge impact on people's lives, a huge impact on their health, a huge impact on the health service, and we're already seeing a huge impact on the economy. And who knows what the consequences of all this will be. Presiding Officer, everybody should stay at home, stay safe, and save lives. Thank you.
Call Alex Rowley.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'll aim to be brief as well. I would firstly want to acknowledge the approach that the Government have taken to this bill. Last week, when we debated the consent motion, I was pleased that the Scottish Government had built in accountability to a far greater level than was in the bill that went through Westminster, and that was important. And in looking at this bill, my view has been that the fact that we do have the 6-month review for this Parliament to be able to make that decision. We have the 2-monthly reporting back where any of these powers are used, and now we're moving towards a system. It may be the one that Anna Sarwar's put forward, but certainly some kind of system that will hold the government to account. And I think we can therefore be satisfied. Certainly Labour will be supporting this bill tonight. I would only want to make a couple of other brief points. I said in opening up that we'd had 10 years of austerity in this country, and therefore we have to be realistic that the impact that austerity has had on frontline public services, and it is those very public services that are now being expected to be on the front line supporting those communities and those people in communities that will need support at this time of great crisis. So my thinking tonight, and I think we should all be thinking about those frontline workers. Yes, the frontline workers in health and social care, and that includes everyone in those hospitals and in the community providing that social care. They need the PPE, they need the social distancing, and they need to be able to access tests. But remember also the refuse collectors, the frontline workers that are maintaining an emergency work in terms of housing. Right across the public sector and local government, there are workers on the front line. The organisation that's going on behind that to make sure that where people are trapped in their houses, they're going to get the food and the support. So never in my lifetime have we needed frontline public services more than we need them right now. And as parliamentarians, we should be sending out a clear message. One, to say that we're with them and supporting them, and two, that we will do whatever is necessary to get the support and the resources to them. Thank you.
Call John Finney.
Thank you, President Officer. I can also thank the many people that's got us to this point, not least the government staff and everyone for their briefings. And one of the briefings that came in very early was from the Scottish Human Rights Commission. Indeed, it came in blind. It was in advance of this legislation. And I'd like to quote from it, please. And it said, "The state has a positive obligation under Article 2 of the European Convention of Human Rights to take reasonable steps to minimise the risk posed to life posed by the current outbreak." And I think, and the Scottish Greens will be supporting this legislation at decision time, I think this revised legislation is proportionate. And if we go right back to the opening statement from the Cabinet Secretary, he talked about it being solely to address this issue. He talked about the necessity of it. He talked about working together. And I think the collaborative working that we've seen is very positive. And I hope, like others, that that will continue with the singular aim of saving lives. Now, much has been made of the monitoring of this extensive suite of powers that's been made available, and I think it's very important that we have detailed discussions on that. The Scottish Green Party unashamedly focused on one element, and that was housing, and very grateful to Minister Kevin Stewart for his very positive engagement on that, and my colleagues Andy Whiteman and Ross Greer have been very active in this, and they were addressing concerns that I know were shared across the chamber. Indeed, the Minister himself said it's essential to keep people in their homes. Absolutely, that's the case in ordinary times, but in these stark times, it's more compelling than ever. Now, I would like to associate myself with the remarks that Alec Rowley made about the ordinary people, as they might be referred to, who are absolutely the bedrock of our communities. The people who drive our buses, the people who clean our hospitals, our shop workers, they're absolutely fundamental. It's maybe hope going forward that there's a greater level of appreciation. There's a number of significant justice measures, some of them haven't even been touched on in the course of the small period. Fiscal fines, the alteration to fiscal fines, very, very positive. I hope it will continue through. Diverting people from prosecution, keeping them out the system and offering alternatives. Cases appearing from custody and the changes there, very, very minor in one respect, coupled in with the national custody hubs that the Scottish Police are putting in place. I hope that doesn't become the de facto situation, because we do need people detained in their own area and appearing in their own area. So I'm sure we'll be alert to that. Extensions to time limits and the phraseology intended to prevent in as so far as possible. I think there was a lot of positives in there, particularly when it talked about depleted judges, sheriffs, prosecutors and defence agents. And the policy memorandum outlined an anomalous situation that goes to address. The release of prisoners was touched on by some, and I've had many exchanges with the Cabinet Secretary for Justice on this, and I've expressed my somewhat frustration about the risk aversion that's part of the process of home detention. I see him shaking his head. I know he agrees that there's benefits that can come from that, and indeed he shared that with me. Of course, everything is subject to risk assessment, and the key element of this that was mentioned in debate was that it wouldn't apply if anyone posed an immediate risk of harm to an identified person. Now, that, of course, is crucial in domestic violence cases, and it's crucial that there's awareness of controlling and coercive behaviour and how that might manifest itself in these circumstances. There was a whole suite of things covering corporate parents, which we have responsibility for, and child assessment protection order. So, just to conclude, the Scottish Green Party will be supporting this, and we do believe that these are reasonable steps to deal with a crisis that confronts us. Thank you, President Officer.
Call Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I start by offering my thanks to Mike Russell and the Bill team and all the officials who made this possible, and for their patience. This is not my natural sphere of operation. I also want to associate my remarks with everyone who's mentioned those people who are also doing their bit today, and that's in the front line, whether it's in our critical care wards, in our pharmacies, even in the hubs. My own wife Jill will be teaching at one of the childcare hubs tomorrow. Today's been really important. Today has shown that Parliament still matter, and that's a really important message to send out to the people that we all represent in our communities, that even at time of crisis we have a functioning legislature which still knows how to exercise that function. It is at times of great national peril that democracy is at its most threatened, and it is often seen in other countries where governments will overreach in terms of the civil contingencies and the powers they pull back towards themselves to ensure that, under the guise of protecting their nations, that they begin down the path towards tyranny. And we can see some of that in countries like Hungary. I'm very glad that this Parliament today has asserted its supremacy, and that the government has worked closely with Parliament to recognise and build that sense of consensus. 3 weeks ago, Presiding Officer, if you'd told me that we'd be living in a Scotland now where members of the public would have to account for their movements to the police, I would have been appalled. But today, I accept it without question. Coronavirus pandemic has completely altered the rules by which we play. It has changed our sense of reality, and that can be typified in the fact that we are seen cheering on police officers upending a barbecue in Essex, or shouting at a pedestrian on Perth High Street for violating quarantine restrictions. So changed is our reality. Policing by consent, as we heard from Meredith Fraser, is one of the principles of our free society. Police follow rules determined by democratically elected parliamentarians, and that hasn't changed. The powers of lockdown are clearly limited to the duration of this emergency, and are ones that I know from my discussion with my friends in the force, they are keenly looking forward to handing back. Policing by consent is part of our social contract, and today we protected another part of our social contract, and that is trial by jury. I am very grateful for the movement that the government have made on that today, and I look very much forward to joining with them and members of other parties and the judiciary to work towards workable solutions. I am still wedded to my cinema idea, Mike Russell. That sense of national urgency is why we meet today, and I applaud the government for the spirit of consensus that they have sought to build, and not least in the jury trials, but in the other amendments that they have moved on today as well. Particularly, I think, around things like my amendment, which was accepted unanimously, which will make it clear that we still want witnesses to give evidence in real time, that written statements, are no substitute for the ability to cross-examine witnesses to get to the truth, the heart of the matter in cases that come before our courts. I still think that the freedom of information provisions in this bill will cast a long shadow, and the even division on Ross Greer's amendment, split as it was between 82 members equally, will sound a hollow ring in our democracy. And I very much hope that subsequent opportunities to legislate on an emergency basis as this crisis develops will see that remedied. But for now, Presiding Officer, I'm quite happy to offer the full-throated support of the Liberal Democrats tonight.
Thank you very much, Mr Cole-Hamilton. And could I call on the Cabinet Secretary to conclude our debate?
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I want to be very brief. I had an opportunity to speak at the beginning of this debate, so I want to make just 3 points. One is, I take the point about working across parties. In a sense, we have all learned from that. I have, in the past, worked with Alec Rowley very well, many years ago. I have on occasion worked with Patrick Harvey. I've worked with a variety of Liberal Democrats. It is an entirely new experience for me to have close engagement with Murdo Fraser. I'm not sure it's something I ever aspired to. It's not something that I particularly wish to continue forever, but in an emergency, you have to take exceptional action. So I look forward to working with Murdo Fraser and others to make sure that we get this right. And there is a serious point in that, which is that we have learning to do on this. We have learning to do an exchange of information, and there will be other bills coming along and other work coming along and scrutiny coming along. I look forward to doing so. I even look forward to close engagement with Murdo Fraser. Secondly, we are the public tip of a very, very large iceberg. Alec Rowley made a very important point about all the people working in Scotland to maintain essential services, of course in the National Health Service, but also in shops, trying to keep essential services going, those who are trying to make sure that those who have to go to work get supported in public transport and in other ways, and in this Parliament. And I want to pay a particular tribute to three groups of people. First of all, to the Parliament staff led by David McGill. It has been an extraordinary experience, I know, for them as for everybody else to do this today. I'm very grateful to every single one of them. And having to cope with over 50 amendments at stage 2 in the time they did a remarkably good job. Secondly, I want to pay a tribute to all our own staff who work for MSPs in our local offices or here. They have also taken a tremendous burden upon themselves in the last period, particularly with the enormous increase in inquiries, and I want to thank every single one of them. And finally, I want to pay a tribute to our officials, to the civil service, who have worked so hard on this bill and who are working across the civil service to support the effort of this government at every level, in every department. There's been an extraordinary bill team on this who took a bill from nowhere 8 days ago to what I hope will pass very shortly. They have done an exceptional job, and they've carried on today supporting individual members across the chamber who have had amendments. But there are civil servants and officials in every part of the Scottish Government and every part of the public service who are doing this day in and day out at the moment. We owe them a great deal, and we will not forget them. And finally, Presiding Officer, as I drive to Argyll tonight, which I intend to do so, I know I shall pass roadside signs that have 3 messages on them, and I want to repeat those messages now as the core messages. Stay at home. Protect the NHS. Save lives. That's what we're doing today, and that's what we will have to go on doing for a period to come. Stay at home. Protect the NHS. Save lives.
Thank you very much, Minister and colleagues. That concludes our debate on the Coronavirus Scotland Bill. It's now time to put the question on the bill at stage 3. So the question is that motion 21371 in the name of Michael Russell on the Coronavirus Scotland Bill at stage 3 be agreed, and members should cast their votes now. The result of the vote on motion number 21371 in the name of Michael Russell is yes, 80. There were no votes against, there were no abstentions. The motion is agreed and the Coronavirus Scotland Bill is passed. The next item of business is consideration of business motion 21364 in the name of Graham Day on behalf of the Bureau setting out a business programme. Could I call on Graham Day to move this motion?
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. No member has indicated they wish to speak. Therefore, the question is that motion 21364 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. The next item is consideration of Parliamentary Bureau motion 21368 and approval of an SSI. Again, could I call on Graham Day on behalf of the Bureau to move this motion?
Moved, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. The question on this will come at decision time. The next item is consideration of 5 SSI. Again, SSIs. Could I call on Graham Day to move motions 21372 to 21375 and 21380 on approval of an SSI?
Moved, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. So we come to decision time. The first question is that motion 21368 in the name of Graham Day on approval of an SSI be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. And I propose to ask a single question on the 5 government motions. Does anyone object? No. No. So the question is that motions 21372, 21372, 21372 to 21375 and 21380 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Now, just before we conclude, I'm conscious of members' forbearance throughout the day. It's been a long day. I just wanted to say a few words about the importance of maintaining our democracy in the face of this public health crisis. And I want to assure the Chamber, and indeed the wider public, that the Parliament is exploring with colleagues from all parties every avenue to determine how the Chamber and committees can continue to undertake their crucial scrutiny role at this unprecedented time. The Bureau and the corporate body have been meeting online. The conveners group have been discussing issues remotely, and they will continue to do so over recess to look at the most effective options for both Chamber and committees. Now, the Minister for Parliamentary Business assured the Bureau earlier, and I'm sure many members will have heard the Cabinet Secretary, Mr Russell, indicate at the end of the Stage 2 amendment period to the emergency bill that the Government is looking again at how members' written questions over this period can be answered as promptly as possible, and at further steps ministers may take to adapt to the current circumstances. I trust that the Government will use all methods available to inform Parliament of key decisions and activities to full effect during this time, including writing to committees and Government-initiated questions. I know we all recognise the need for Parliament to continue to be able to hold Government to account. I would draw members' attention to the service also provided by SPICE, which provides an authoritative, accurate and up-to-date source of information on all matters to do with the coronavirus. And I'm very grateful to colleagues for their assistance. I don't want to cast a pall over members. I do have powers of recall should they be required. However, we are keeping the situation under daily review, and I hope I can assure you that we'll be prepared to respond however the situation resolves. And on that note, I'm going to close this meeting, and we'll meet again on Tuesday, the 21st of April. I close this meeting.